Hey there, practice of the practice community. Are you ready to take your private practice to the next level? Then mark your calendars for September 16th through 19th, 2024, because Level Up Week is back and bigger than ever. Insert rocket emoji here. Join us for 4 days of live webinars, interactive panels, and exclusive resources tailored just for counselors, therapists, and private practice owners. Whether you're looking to fill your caseload, hire your first clinician, or scale your group practice, we've got you covered. This is your chance to level up while others give up. Don't miss out on this game-changing event. Register now at practiceofthepractice.com/level up and get ready to transform your practice. Remember, September 16th through 19th, Level Up Week, your ticket to practice success. Register today and let's level up together. Practiceofthepractice.com/level up. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanak, session number 1051. I'm Joe Sanak, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast. We are just about a month away from Level Up Week, where September 16th through 19th, we are going to be bringing 16 or more live webinars to you to help you at every single phase of practice, whether you are in solo practice, whether you're moving from solo into group, or you have a growing or mega group practice. We have panels for you, we have trainings for you, all sorts of things around pay-per-click advertising, marketing, all sorts of different things coming up. So make sure you sign up for that over at practiceofthepractice.com/level up. That is right around the corner. Really excited to be bringing that to you this fall again. Well, as many of you know, I'm a single dad, and I have sole physical custody of my kids. They see their mom, maybe once a month. And that's something that publicly I've talked a little bit about. Haven't dug into the details, and kind of my mindset is if my girls ever listen to this show, I want them to feel like I supported them without too much of their baggage being out there, but also to be able to say, hey, like, people go through tough stuff. And so that's why I'm really excited today that we have Randy Flood with me. Randy's been a psychologist in Grand Rapids, Michigan since 1992, specializing both in men's psychology and as the founder and director of Men's Resource Center of West Michigan, and a forensic psychologist providing family evaluations, counseling, and expert consultation. He is also a co-author of 2 books on men's issues and a host of his podcast called Revealing Men. Randy is available online for consultation or coaching. He loves biking and photography. He's married with adult children and 4 grandchildren. Randy, welcome to the Practice podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Joe, for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so custody issues, parental issues, parental estrangement. How did you get into that work?
Well, I did a forensic internship, much to my chagrin. It was just available, and I took it, and then I learned from forensic psychologists the whole field of working with family court and criminal court. And then I realized that I was actually good at and interested in the analytical aspect of forensic psychology, where you're focused on trying to help the courts understand complex problems, human problems, whether in terms of why, and the severity and scope of their kind of criminal behavior, and putting it into terms that the judge can understand or an attorney can understand, and also looking at family court, helping them understand complex family dynamics. And I love to evaluate and be with families and spend time with them and do psychological testing, and then write up a report to describe what I find and make some recommendations to help, and then I'm done. Except for, of course, when attorneys disagree with my findings because they're zealous advocates for their clients, and then I end up having to testify, which often happens. But it's different than psychotherapy when you're with patients or clients for months and years, helping them transform their lives. So it's just provides me good variety.
Yeah. I think it's good to have a niche, but it's also, depending on what niche you're in, it can burn you out. And so to have that plus some men's issues you do. Now, tell me a little bit about that intersection of that custody work and kind of men's issues. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I like I said, the men's issues, I direct the Men's Resource Center, so we have specialized counseling and evaluative services for men, and seeing men as a special population and knowing that they experience just like women do or minority cultures, LGBTQ folk, they experience society and growing up differently than others, and so it's important to recognize their special challenges and unique gifts and struggles. so so when I look in the custody arena, the intersection is that these men are dads. And so I'm taking my knowledge of men's psychology and using that to help me understand fathers and how they approach co-parenting and parenting, and both the strengths that they bring to it and sometimes the way society misunderstands fathers, and they have a lot of myths about fathers, from the Tender Years document back in the 1970s, where men weren't having much custody of babies and infants because they didn't have natural proclivities toward nurturing and the children weren't attaching to them. There was this idea that it was only a primary attachment, but now we understand that children can attach to more than one person and it's actually
Mhm.
healthy for them too. And so I understand the unique gifts that fathers bring to parenting and want to embrace that and advocate for that. But at the same time, I also understand sometimes for some men the challenges that they have with nurturing and co-parenting, and they can bring some control issues or domination issues into the arena, and that can be problematic with parenting and co-parenting. So I understand the spectrum that men bring into that, and I try to again take it case by case and see
Yeah.
what this particular father or what this particular mother brings to the children, and try to assess case by case.
Yeah, now, so that the listening audience is kind of on the same page in regards to just vocabulary, will you kind of break down some of those key terms in regards to especially parental estrangement? What is that? What does it typically look like? What are you looking for as a professional? And then maybe we can dig into just kind of some of the overall factors. But what
Sure.
is parental estrangement? How do you define that? And like, what is important for us to know before we dig in too far into this conversation?
Yeah, we look at it on a spectrum. So, first of all, you have the issue of, say, the children experiencing some kind of breach or some kind of resistance and refusal to like the parenting time that's court ordered or agreed upon. And so there can be reasons on the estrangement side of the spectrum, which is child abuse and neglect or an unfit parent. And so the children are actually experiencing this parent as having flaws and having deficits, and then, as a response to that, they are wanting to resist or refuse maybe the parenting time that was ordered unnecessarily or without an understanding of some of that parent's unfitness. And so, my assessment would be to try to appreciate what is going on for that child and then make recommendations for rehabilitation of the parent who's struggling, so that we can reunify and get the children back into a safe and healthy relationship with that unfit parent. On the other side of the spectrum, of children who are resisting or refusing time with a parent is the alienation dynamic, which for most people is counterintuitive, because when we think of children resisting time or having fear of a parent, we automatically or intuitively think, well, that must parent must have done something wrong. They must be unfit. Otherwise, a child naturally loves and gravitates toward a healthy parent. So, what's wrong with that parent? But what is counterintuitive about it is that we don't realize that that parent is rejecting actually a average range parent or sometimes a good enough to a superior parent from the parent they favor. And that favored parent, behind the scenes, if you will, is stealing the mind and heart of a child and establishing this loyalty contract that basically says the way that you love me and show loyalty to me is by rejecting the other parent and showing hatred and fear toward that parent. And it becomes this attachment process where the child becomes increasingly more enmeshed and aligned with the favored parent, which is the alienating parent, and then begins to reject and hate and fear a good enough or superior parent.
Mm. Now, hearing that, as a parent that has, the primary custody and, I have a lot of time with my kids. Like, as I hear you say that, I'm like, I don't I don't want to be that alienating parent.
Right.
So having a guy in front of you, or on this show, that you can coach and say, here's what to avoid, here's what to do. What would you say, just for me personally, and people listening can say, well, that would be how they'd apply it to maybe some of their clients. But what would you advise me as a dad in regards to having uh, the majority of the custody time? What can I do to not be an alienating parent?
Well, without assessing your situation, I mean, let's just say that we have a a disproportionate amount of time the children spend with you because it has been deemed by agreement or by a court that you are a favored parent for a reason. There's some level of fitness there, and the other parent, the mother in this case, is been deemed a parent who's not as not as attached in a healthy way to the children, and so there's some fitness issues. Ultimately, as a favored parent, your job is to help the children continue to love and respect and see their mom as their mom, and as they get older, to work toward developing coping skills and resiliency to be able to have the best possible relationship with their mom, so that they can learn to take care of themselves in that relationship if there's fitness issues, and it be just like with a anytime you have a parent who has mental health issues, substance use issues, for whatever reason, health problems. You want a child to be able to do their best to try to stay attached to them in a way where they can take care of themselves as well as take care of the relationship and that loving attachment. And so, if you're not alienating, you're always looking at ways to help the child do just that. An alienating parent, in contrast, is really trying to erase a parent from a child's life, and they experience a tremendous amount of success and egotistical gratification by being able to see themselves as the superior parent who has total possession of the children, and that's just a different motive, a different mindset. And so I can't counsel you on how much you encourage and push your children and to increase their time or spend time with their mom, because I don't know what the conditions are.
Yeah, of
But
course.
that would be the mindset, that you're always looking at ways of saying, geez, these children, these are the only mom and dads I have, so let's work toward establishing the best relationship possible with the conditions we have today. And if those conditions change tomorrow or next year, then we're always thinking in a flexible way to see if we can um, reapproach that, and be creative in figuring out different ways in the future if that's possible.
Tell me about that flexibility you just said. Like, what do parents do in regards to not being flexible that you think is damaging or harmful to the kids?
I think there's a black and white approach. There's a very legalistic, dogmatic view of a human or a family system that tends to be often more complex and dynamic. So they're not willing to look at the nuances and how people change and time marches on and people evolve. And again, sometimes people devolve. you know, as time marches on, we become less versions of ourselves rather than better. So I don't claim to say that always time and space provides opportunities for growth, but just being able to to approach the situation with curiosity and openness, to see if things have changed, if variables have changed, so that things can maybe be different for the children, rather than thinking in a very rigid, inflexible way that kind of all bad. This other parent's all bad. I'm all good. Time with me is so great. Time with the other parent's going to be destructive. Moving out of that real black and white, polarized, kind of tribal kinds of way of thinking, and thinking more creatively and more openly.
Yeah. How have you seen co-parents do that? And obviously, you're not going to share confidential information, but just kind of generally, like, are there situations that come to mind when the primary parent was someone that went in with creativity? They went in with that idea of curiosity and flexibility that you think is sort of an example of a model of that.
Yeah, sometimes again, there's so many variables. I think that there can be times where I've seen parents like that get taken advantage of. They approach it with naivety, and they really want to do the right thing, be cooperative and collaborative, and they're working with a co-parent who is has a personality disorder or is really inflexible and is going to take advantage and weaponize that person's conciliatory nature and a tendency to be agreeable,
Mm,
and so that person ends up um, yeah being taken advantage of and the children suffer. But I do think that sometimes people take a lead and show that that level of cooperation and not getting into the mud and not mudslinging and fighting and taking the higher ground can be contagious. And I've seen it, when I do parenting coordination, which is a post divorce. Sometimes people call it co-parenting counseling, that can be ordered by the court or people agree to it through stipulation, where they come together and I'm a parent coordinator and help them make co-parenting decisions together for the best interest of the children so they're not going to court for all their disagreements. And that's very satisfying work. And you do see that just what you're referring to, that there will be a co-parent who's really showing a lot of leadership and a lot of courage to be able to do the right thing and rise above the pettiness and the accusations, and just really show that we're here, we're working for the children. I know that you don't like me as an ex-lover, I know that we had problems, but we're trying to establish a business relationship now. We're working to try to see if we can raise our children, where that's the business we're in, it's an important enterprise, let's do this together. And that kind of approach over time can show positive results. And again, like I said earlier, sometimes it doesn't. And
mhm,
people have to shift and move into what we call a parallel parenting model, which you reduce negotiations and you develop lots of rules and policies to make decisions for you, and you follow like the constitution of your agreement. And my job as a parent coordinator is to help them fill that in. So they're referring to the roadmap, and how they're supposed to act rather than calling each other and emailing each other on the fly for every decision and think they can be collaborative, because that just invites conflict. And so we do a parallel co-parenting model versus what I was speaking to earlier is more of a cooperative co-parenting model.
mm. Something always comes up when you're running a private practice. Well, Gusto's payroll and HR services can make it a little easier. Gusto was designed for you, the small business owner. They take the pain out of running a business, automatically calculating paychecks, filing payroll taxes, setting up open enrollment. Gusto does it all. Want more? Time tracking, health insurance, 401k, onboarding, commuter benefits, offer letters, access to HR experts. You get the idea. With Gusto, you can focus on the joy of running your business. It's super easy to set up and get started. And if you're moving from another provider, Gusto can transfer all the data for you. It's no surprise 99% of businesses said the value they get for Gusto is worth the price. And here's the best part, because you're a listener, you get 3 months totally free. All you have to do is go to gusto.com/Joe. Again, that's gusto.com/Joe. I'm telling you, you're going to love Gusto. Get started today. Now, you mentioned personality disorders. Are there other either diagnoses or situations that some of this kind of general advice that you're giving, that you would say are kind of qualifiers? Like, yeah, but in this situation, you might want to have a different approach. So you had mentioned personality disorders. Are there other things that you would say kind of fall into that category that complicate things a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that it doesn't. require a personality disorder sometimes for people to experience divorce is quite traumatic and upsetting, which, as we know, divorce is very disruptive. To if you can be a fairly healthy person and pretty fit emotionally and mentally, and still go through a divorce, and it can be very destabilizing. They say it takes good 2 years to grow yourself and heal yourself through a divorce. And so that we know to be just a general stressor for all people going through it. However, for some people who might have kind of unresolved trauma with respect to, let's say, abandonment, might have experienced a parent in their life who abandoned them, or they might have experienced a loss of a person early in their life, or poor attachment to parents who weren't very fit for them, and so they have a strong attachment to this idea of a intact family, and they're kind of really zealously advocate for keeping the family together, and their sense of security comes from that. So then a divorce for them can be quite triggering and pretty traumatic, and they go into a really regressive um, state and become quite dysfunctional in the way that they're viewing it. They become pretty possessive. They use the children as weapons or instruments to help them feel better about themselves, help them feel more secure. And that can be kind of fertile ground for post divorce conflict and chronic problems for a parent
Mm,
if they have a kind of an underlying trauma that gets triggered.
yeah. Now, the majority of our listeners are therapists of some sort, counselors, psychologists, social workers, MFTs. Um, what are things that the typical therapist misses in a session when we're talking about parental estrangement, custody, co-parenting? Like, what are the things that are just we miss because we don't have the training, because we have certain biases? Like, what do we typically miss?
Well, I think it's that we miss not understanding the other side of the spectrum, which is the parental alienation side. And I think, and again, people have, there's the first version of it was parental alienation syndrome by Richard Gardner, and that's has since been debunked. But I mean, I could go if we had time. There's just so many. The American Psychological Association, there's so many people and organizations that now legitimize parental alienation. But the problem is that we're, as therapists, trained in child abuse and neglect. And so when we see families in our office, we're often, we learn the arithmetic of child abuse and neglect. And so we look at families and through that lens, and we sometimes get into becoming negative advocates, and get sucked into the alienation dynamic unwittingly, and we can become part of the problem. And so I think that the challenge for us as therapists and as professionals is to learn the trigonometry of alienation, so that when we get families and we understand and appreciate the role we're in as, say, a children's counselor or the counselor for a parent, and staying in our lane, and then making proper referrals, or consulting with others, or collaborating, so they're not working in our silos. Um, but I do see, when I work in doing evaluations, I unfortunately see a lot of therapists becoming negative advocates in alienation, and think they're working in a child abuse and neglect case, but they're actually making the case worse by functioning with protocols that address child abuse and neglect, when they're actually furthering the alienation.
Mm. And how are they furthering that alienation typically?
Sometimes by just doing things like writing a letter to the judge. They might be seeing the children for 5 or 6 times. The alienating parent brought the children in. They haven't really had much contact with, let's say, this is a case of, I'm doing an evaluation, so I'm using these words. So the targeted parent hasn't been involved. So the alienating parent set the table, and they told a false narrative to the therapist that this other parent is abusive and neglectful, and that's why the children don't want to spend time with their dad or their mom. And so, can you please write a letter to the judge so you can advocate for the children because they're scared of spending time to not have to do the court ordered parenting time because it's not in their best interest? Sure, I'll help you out by doing that. And so they go ahead and proceed and write a letter. And so
Mm.
most judges, I mean, that are trained in this will throw out the letter and say this is not helpful. But again, a lot of counselors get involved in advocating um, for certain positions in the parenting time problems when they're not an evaluator role to really discern what's going on in the complex dynamics. And so they just need to be a little more cautious and making assumptions about diagnostically what's going on. When sometimes as an evaluator, I meet with the families over several sessions, and I can't figure out what's going on talking to both of them, and I'm confused. But then I learn more when I do psychological testing. I learn more when I consult with teachers and police officers, CPS workers, and other therapists involved in the family. And then with all this collection of data, then it becomes clear what the preponderance of the data is telling me. And so when you're only working in a silo with just a limited amount of data, it's sometimes easy to assume you know what's going on.
Yeah. Now, if all co-parents in the world were listening right now, and I'll ask you kind of our typical question, but I'd love to know if co-parents that want to be good co-parents were listening right now, what would be data you would want them to know? What are techniques you would want them to know? Mindsets that they should enact? Like what would you wish co-parents knew about co-parenting?
Hmm. Yeah, I think one adage I would say is that there was such a stigma around divorce, as you know, decades ago, and in certain communities, more conservative communities, there still can be a stigma, and so it can be really hard for some people to accept that a divorce is maybe necessary. Um, Children can survive divorce. The research is pretty clear that if it's a healthy divorce and co-parents are operating in the best interest of the children and it's not high conflict, that children can transition and adapt pretty well. I mean, Constance Ahrens wrote a book called The Good Divorce, and she talks about some of those dynamics and how divorce can be a good process. Not that you would create that for your child intentionally, but just to kind of have that mindset. This doesn't have to be catastrophic. We can make lemonade out of lemons type of thing. Um, but what kids can't handle is conflict. When they see two humans that they love and they want to spend time with hate each other and badmouth each other and distrust each other, that is incredibly difficult for children to adapt and adjust to. They're in this tribal environment where they end up feeling like they have to pick a side, um, and because standing in the ambiguity of it all is just too stressful, and so they got to simplify their life and just make a decision. So I guess I would tell parents that sometimes you're fighting for something you think is noble and good, and but remember that the fight itself sometimes is what the biggest problem is. And so it is important to fight for safety and well-being, and justice, and say in an alienation or an abuse neglect case. Yeah, but be careful that you are pursuing something, and the fight is actually the problem.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really good reminder to co-parents. Now, the last question I always ask is if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
I would just want them to see that the field of family court counseling and evaluations, just like other specialty fields, is a specialty field. It's like knowing what you don't know, and it's like in medical field. We got cardiologists, urologists, and you could be a general practitioner, and then part of being a good family practitioner, a general practitioner, is to know when to make referrals and know when you need to say, oh, I know quite a bit about kidneys. I know quite a bit about bones, but I think I need to make a referral here. And I think the same is true in the field of family court counseling, in that when you get families or clients in, when they're involved in a complex divorce process, and you catch wind that there's a custody and parenting time dispute going on, and there's maybe some litigation going on, sometimes it's helpful to collaborate or refer out. And there's people like myself, right close to me is a family court counseling professionals in West Michigan. We work together as forensic psychologists and mental health workers who specialize in this field. And so, just recognizing that, sometimes it's helpful to see this as a specialty area, and making sure that these specialists are working with the families so that they can do the best job for them and the children.
Mm. So awesome. Randy, if people want to connect with you, if they want to work with you, consult with you, coach with you, where can we find you?
Yeah, I have two websites they can find me. Is the menscenter.org, and then the fountainhillcenter.com. Here in Grand Rapids, the fountainhillcenter.com, and my email is rflood@fountainhillcenter.com. Yeah, and I do coaching and consulting with parents going through difficult divorces, and also expert testimony and consulting for attorneys, and then I also do the specialized counseling for men, and do lots of groups for men. So, yeah.
Randy, thank you so much for your work you're doing here in Michigan and across the nation, and thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joe.
One really just amazing thing about having a podcast is the experts you get to interview. I rarely look ahead other than the day before as to kind of who I'm going to be interviewing. I like to go into it with fresh eyes, and that's just kind of my process. Some people love to read tons and tons about people before they interview them. But just being able to interview people like Randy, that for me personally impacts me. Things that I knew, but also were good reminders, but some things that, I didn't know, that just personally helped me be a better dad. But then also there's professional things where I get to interview all sorts of people. So, having a podcast is such a powerful thing on so many levels of the people you meet, the information you get, but then even being able to monetize it through sponsorships or your own communities or whatever you want to launch. So, if you're interested in launching a podcast or, learning more about podcasting, we have a website called Podcast Launch School. We have a course over there. We do consulting. We support podcasters in a variety of ways. We have a great team that supports therapists and influencers that are launching podcasts or already have them. So if that sounds interesting to you, head on over to podcastlaunchschool.com. Also, next month, we are doing Level Up Week. It's kicking off September 16th, going till the 19th of 2024. You can register for all those events over at practiceofthepractice.com/level up. That is going to be an amazing event where we have, one of the favorite things that I love doing is having panels of people that are all in solo practice or all have just started a group or have a group practice, and just having them talk, just getting them talking about what it's like to be in private practice, sharing tips, and then taking your questions. So if any of that sounds interesting, head on over to practiceofthepractice.com/level up. And, I don't know about you, but I don't like doing payroll. I don't like doing time tracking. I don't like managing the health insurance, 401ks, onboarding, all those things that it comes with running a business. So if you want to outsource all of that, Gusto is where you need to outsource it. You can focus on just the joy of running your private practice, and it's so easy to get started. It's who we use for our payroll, and it's no surprise 99% of businesses say that they value what they get from Gusto and that it's worth the price. So because you're a listener, you can get 3 months totally free to check out Gusto. Head on over to gusto.com/Joe. That's Gusto spelled GUSTO.com/Joe, and get started today. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have an amazing day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.